Okay, we're doing the same thing as yesterday, except we're starting earlier and we're gonna start right off the bat here. We're popping off right from the get-go. So we arrived at this foundational principles of intelligent natural information processing. This idea of an intelligent natural information processing system, and these are like the tenets of it. The information store principle. Behavioral responses in humans are governed by massive, highly organized repositories of information. This repository's long-term memory, which functions analogously to the genome in biological evolution. Right, long-term memory stores automated schemas, heuristics, and procedural rules. The automaticity of human behavior relies entirely on the richness of this information store. The more we also have to say it also relies on genetics in general. That's also kind of guiding the protein synthesis happening in the brain. Obviously, this is a nature nurture. It's not one or the other. It's in between. The more comprehensive the schemas, the more automatically the organism can respond to complex environmental stimuli without requiring conscious deliberation. Right, and then this is ambiguous as to what we mean by comprehensive. Like, we need to retrospectively say it's comprehensive because it can respond to complex environmental stimuli. It's the comprehensive is defined by the second part here. So, not the best way of going about it, but the borrowing and reorganizing principle to build the information store efficiently, the cognitive system inherently defaults to borrowing existing schemas from the external environment, typically from other humans through So this is also like the way that these are being explained is to jump around in terms of layers of abstraction when we're talking about the brain and neural. Can I say? I can't say neurological, neurobiological architectures. Right, but there's this efficiency rule. The random and the efficiency rule we could also just touch or connect to the free energy principle. Then we got the randomness as genesis principle, and this is what we talked about a ton yesterday. When the cognitive architecture encounters a highly novel environment where existing stored schemas fail and no external information is available to borrow, the system automatically resorts to random generation and testing. And as we saw, this random generation is still afforded by, or at least grounded by, your current schemas, which in this case has made its way to working memory. And so you're starting with your working memory and you're going from there. This process manifesting as means ends analysis or trial and error problem solving. And this was the discussion of salience we talked about. Is analogous to genetic mutation. It is a highly effortful, computationally expensive process that floods working memory, illustrating why the brain vastly prefers the automatic execution of existing schemas over novel problem solving. All right, let's move forward then. We've got the narrow limits of change principle. What could that be? The narrow limits of change. Is this going to talk about the constraints of the environment or the constraints of your existing schemas? To protect the integrity of the massive long-term information store, the architecture severely restricts the volume of novel, unorganized information it can process at any given moment. Okay, so this is going to be affected by your priors, your current schemas, you could say. It's going to, you could think of it as filtering the information that's coming in. In cognitive terms, this is the origin of the strict constraints on working memory capacity and duration. If large amounts of unorganized biologically secondary information were allowed to rapidly alter long-term memory, it would lead to catastrophic interference and the degradation of survival critical automated rules. All right. So this has to be some sort of interpretation of the system. Now you could think about the outcome here just being like some sort of ideal outcome or equilibrium that's still following free energy principle and homeostasis and allostasis and whatnot, but it's hard to actually follow the development of the brain for the sake of this rule, for this principle. All right, the environment organizing and linking principle. Yo, Energy Domter. Absolutely. You've cashed in the ticket that I offered. All right, let's just get through 2.6 and then we can switch over for a hot second. So once schemas are securely stored in long-term memory, they generate signals that automatically link with corresponding environmental cues, right? This principle is the engine of automaticity. It allows humans to bypass the narrow limits of working memory entirely. When a known environmental cue is detected, the linked schema executes automatically, allowing for fluid, complex behaviors such as driving a car or reading a sentence without conscious processing of individual subcomponents. Okay, that's kind of just, we've already now connected back to the beginning here, the information store. And then we've got the explicit intention to learn principle, which is going to be the connection to Heidegger's notion of curiosity. This idea that we have to keep going towards new information, and this is now we're certainly in the notion of allostasis. We can't just rely on our current state, like we can't just rest because we could die in the next moment or in the next day. Recently identified as the critical factor distinguishing human cognition from lower level biological systems, this principle represents an emergent characteristic of human intelligence. It's not just human intelligence that does this. It allows for intentional, controlled processing. Okay, so maybe this is talking about something very specific for consciousness. Now, that being said, I would also still say other species have this. To override implicit evolved heuristics when confronted with novel biologically secondary challenges, this explicit intention is driven by intellectual motivation and curiosity, enabling humans to deliberately construct new schemas and transition them into automatic rules through practice. So I might not even like this entire framework, just how ambiguous it is, and that it can be just connected back to the actual science that tells us what's going on. So I feel like all of this stuff might already be covered. I might just gank it. I know I'm using gank incorrectly, but I might just throw it out. I might just can it. I might light it ablaze. Yeah, let's throw it away. Let's get out of here. I think we're done with that. All right, so before we do that, let's do this. Let's get Gemini up. Let's get this downloaded. Let's get going. Let's throw that into here and say, can you summarize what's actually, let's just say, what's going on here? And just to be clear, I'm going to be critical. It's a consciousness discussion. If it's going in any weird way, then we gotta be critical of it. Makes a difference. A reluctant dualist's confession. Interesting. So, a reluctant dualist. What does that mean? Does that mean they're reluctant to be a dualist, or that they're a dualist that's reluctant to confess? A little ambiguity up here. If something odd persists, would its mere persistence make it natural? That would be the case with the layperson, but the scientist and philosopher should know better. Commonness should never mislead us to get used to the incredible, such as the phenomenon known as consciousness underlying the age-old mind-body problem. That consciousness exists at all is odd today as it has been in ancient times. Is as odd today as it has been in ancient times. It's actually much less odd than today than it was in ancient times. We actually understand why it came. But here too, familiarity breeds contempt. The presence of consciousness at every moment in our waking lives often makes us forget how incredible it is. For more than 2 millennia, the study of this problem has made no scientific process. Are we talking about to the current day, or when was this? We've made significant progress. Physicalism, dualism, and all other isms keep debating on on it without being able to propose any decisive argument, not to mention experimental test, which could conclude the debate in favor of one theory or another. So if this came out like before we got, PCI and some of the other brain measurement scans got more sophisticated, then this might be just like completely off the modern understanding of consciousness. But is this statement inevitable? I believe I have a scientific argument in favor of one of the rival parties. Unfortunately, this party is interactionist dualism, which I dislike most. Indeed, my argument comes from the expected penalty on this option, namely entailing violation of a very basic physical principle. Being a physicist, this violation upsets me most. Yet the argument is scientific in that it delves from a philosophical statement, an empirical prediction via the following reasoning. By physicalism, consciousness and brain processes are identical. It depends what we mean by consciousness, right? The thing that we feel like we have is definitely not the brain processes. I should say that differently. We can't think of the we can't think of the things that we feel like we feel as the brain processes. The brain processes, we could say, are affording that feeling, but yeah, this is gonna get into a so we might be making a mistake already in number one. Whence then the dualistic bafflement about their apparent non-identity? Right, we have to be clear about the space in which we think about anything, the space in which we're conceptualizing consciousness and brain processes, and this sentence. By physicalism, this non-identity, and hence the resultant bafflement, must be due to error. Okay, see, I'm always upset when someone starts making up like semantics like this, and then now we have like an equality that is involved, and now we're like operating in logic where these sentences are incredibly ambiguous. We cannot start creating what's the word? Deductive arguments or maybe even clear inductive arguments based on these ambiguous sentences. And I think it's this first one that's really killing us here. So builds his argument by outlining a severe incompatibility between two concepts: the percepts, qualia, non-identity. This is the observation that measurable physical states are fundamentally distinct from the subjective unobserved experiences that accompany them. This is the foundational principle in physics, asserting that every physical event is caused exclusively by other physical events, strictly bound by laws like the conservation of energy. So we got the physical closure problem and the percepts, qualia, non-identity. Okay, the consensus and the rebuttal. To avoid breaking the laws of physics, most modern philosophers and physicalists adopt a compromise stating that qualia play absolutely no causal role in human behavior. Under this view, if qualia did not exist, our physical actions would remain exactly the same. All right, we cannot take that view. Elitzur aggressively rejects the inaction postulate. All right, so we're in agreement in that regard. He argues that the very fact humans actively express bafflement about consciousness and spend time talking, arguing, and writing about the mind-body problem is direct evidence that qualia do exert a causal effect on physical reality. We are baffled by qualia because we actually have them. All right, refuting the physicalist defense. Physicalists attempt to counter Elitzur by arguing that human bafflement over consciousness is simply a cognitive error. They suggest we physically misperceive. So I feel like this is just a stale discussion. The problem with zombies. Elitzur heavily criticized Chalmers' assertion that a philosophical zombie, a hypothetical being physically identical to a human but entirely lacking subjective experience, would also write books and express bafflements about qualia. Elitzur refutes the misperception argument using logical asymmetry. He points out that while a physical misperception, like an optical illusion, is dictated by physical laws, the complete absence of qualia is perfectly conceivable without breaking any laws of physics. Therefore, genuine bafflement cannot be purely the result of physical causation. The complete absence of qualia is perfectly conceivable without breaking any physical laws. Okay. Elitzur concedes that his position requires accepting a severe penalty of subjective consciousness that causes physical behavior. It violates fundamental physical conservation laws. However, he argues this is the only conclusion that gives consciousness a logical evolutionary purpose. Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, there's nothing to gain here. Like we're like way past this type of discussion. But it's always good to point out that where these discussions go awry is always in the linguistics being used. It's always usage of unclear assertions, ambiguous assertions that can create logic systems that feel closed and feel logical. And then, you know, you could start making arguments through those, and that's not really too beneficial. But we've already, I mean, you know, like, we've already talked about this. We've killed this horse, and then we beat it. But thank you for the resource.
Hey, I'm going on a tour.
Hey. All right, 3, computational architectures of rule, compilation, and procedural memory. To clarify, do you agree with Elitzur's argument that consciousness can't be reduced to physical matter because qualia has an influence on physical reality? So I guess the first question is, have you seen any of the videos that I made on consciousness? Because you could probably imply what I would respond to this discussion, or you can infer, I mean, how I would respond just based on those videos and everything I've said on this channel. I feel like I've said this stuff over and over and over again. So do I agree with the argument that consciousness can't be reduced to physical matter because qualia has an influence on physical reality? I wouldn't accept that question. Like, qualia is a way that we describe our subjective experience. Now, even though our subjective experience is a manifestation of physical processes, in the sense that the physical matter is affecting qualia, and or like is affecting what we end up thinking is qualia, and what we end up thinking is qualia is also a part of the physical processes that affect the physical world going into the future. Once again, it's not like consciousness has like an authoritative, above the law control over our bodies and the physical world. Like, our conscious experience is one of not being like privileged. Like, we don't understand what the process is that brings that's bringing out the experiences in each moment. We're just along for the ride as far as we experience the world. So, it wouldn't be right to say qualia has an influence on physical reality, because qualia is the thing that we intuit that we're actually experiencing. But the processes that create consciousness are also affecting the physical world. Like, they're also affecting physical reality. These things are connected. But qualia, this idea of subjective experience that we feel like we feel, is... That's more of like it's more about describing the information that is manifesting to the thing that can make sense of that very information. Like, that's really how we would describe it. It's not, when we're talking about qualia, we're not talking about the whole, system of consciousness itself. We're talking about like the information that's being passed around, or the parts of the brain that are being activated, and it's a different thing. But it's also, once again, in all these cases, we're describing this stuff conceptually in this domain of consciousness. So, all right. So I reject the question. I think the question is old. It's antiquated. It's stale. Okay, computational architectures of rule, compilation, and procedural memory. To rigorously understand how the brain translates complex environmental interactions into automatic rules, researchers utilize computational cognitive architectures, frameworks designed to model the fixed structures and mechanisms underlying intelligent behavior. Frameworks such as ACT-R and SOAR provide robust, mathematically grounded models of how declarative, effortful processing is systematically compiled into automatic procedural memory. So is ACT-R like similar to these LLM what's it called? Benchmarks. These LLM benchmarks, aren't there like ACT something benchmarks? So I don't understand what we're doing here though. This is rule complex. Okay. Core philosophy and grounding, firmly rooted in cognitive psychology, uniquely allows direct quantitative comparison with human empirical data. And then SOAR emphasizes universal general intelligence, and the problem space hypothesis features a highly modular and hierarchical structure resembling intricate mind processes. Yeah, this isn't helping us out though. In both models, the procedural memory system acts as the ultimate repository for automatic rules. Procedural memories govern the execution of cognitive and motor skills without the need for conscious control or active attention. Right, this is our discussion of the basal ganglia and the striatum. All right, the phases of procedural automaticity. The neurological transition from declarative effort to procedural automaticity follows a predictable, quantifiable trajectory, classically modeled by Fitts into three distinct phases of skill acquisition. Man, so this is all just like interpretation that's like high level, high up, and speculative in some sense, but behavior requires immense conscious exertion. Right. We know all this. We don't care. The association phase, through repeated actions and the processing of feedback, individuals begin to compile rules. Patterns of responding emerge and the cognitive load decreases, right? We know all this. This is fine. The final phase involves the perfection of skill. Okay, let's just move past. The habitual loop is the baseline processing algorithm. We know all this, right? The most fundamental behavioral manifestation of this transition to automaticity is the habit loop and automatic processing rules structured around three neurological events: cue, routine, and reward. The brain continuously, unconsciously scans both internal environments and external environments for cues that reliably predict primary survival rewards or secondary cultural rewards. Okay. It's driven fundamentally by dopaminergic anticipatory mechanisms, right? As the cognitive architecture builds a habit through synaptic plasticity, the brain learns to anticipate the reward. Consequently, dopamine is released not just upon receiving the reward, but upon the perception of the cue itself, creating a powerful craving that fuels the automatic execution of the routine. All right, let's move ahead. We already been new. Good morning, Birdbanes. What's good? What is poppin' on this lovely Friday? Happy Friday. Intrinsic perceptual and attentional rules. Before high-level cognitive schemas or procedural habits can be deployed, human cognitive architectures relies on an intrinsic set of perceptual and attentional algorithms to parse the physical environment. Selective attention acts as the primary gateway, filtering vast arrays of sensory input based on rapid bottom-up rules and top-down biases, right? Should we talk about this? Okay, in the how the brain automates behavior, we kind of focused on bottom up. And then at the very end here, we talk about top down, I think. Right? once we get to allostasis and we're talking about the predictive processing priors. So that's going to be our more sophisticated way of talking about bottom up and top down, I think. And is top down always goal directed? I guess so, because a goal would be the prediction and goal. Add the connection somewhere. Add the connection of prediction to goal, in the sense that top-down biases are goal-directed. Okay. I believe physicalism is mistaken because consciousness doesn't have the properties we typically associate with physical matter, so I don't know why you're being so skeptical of arguments against physicalism. Well, we, you know, when I actually go into the full argument for consciousness, I would say that I'm not a physicalist. And I wouldn't say I'm a dualist either. I think it would be inappropriate to think that these are two things in like a similar field. Like, I think there's, in terms of experience, in terms of being, in terms of meaning, in terms of thought, in terms of concepts, there's just this one space of consciousness. We think about anything that we possibly can think about through that space. Now, it feels like we're thinking about something that's external to us, right? It feels that way. And it feels like we're talking about things that can be true. And it feels that we can be right about these things. And those are all qualities of this space of consciousness. Those are all affected by the physical processes in our brain, affect, dopamine, whatever we want to talk about here. Attention through acetylcholine and norepinephrine. Baseball hat to the noggin. Who got hit with a baseball hat? Oh, baseball bat to the noggin. Nice. Who's hitting who? So even though it's an argument against physicalism, it's not a modern argument against physicalism, I don't think, or I don't think it's really as sophisticated as perhaps the argument that I'm putting forward, that we just have to think about this space of our own thoughts differently than our understanding of physicalism. This is why I always try to talk about concepts. Like, we could think about the contents of our thoughts as conceptual, and we can make sense of that through a nice Hegelian way. You know, it's not like these thoughts are actually conceptual in some like absolute sense, but this is a way we can think about them. So we're leveraging thoughts to make sense of thoughts. That's all we can do in this space of thoughts. And yeah, once again, it's not a privileged space, like where we can only try to just make sense of these things. We can only try to conceptualize the physical world or our thoughts or consciousness itself. Hunger cause irritation and aggression. Uh-oh. Who's hungry? So yeah. Okay. Bottom-up salience and attentional capture. The deployment of visual attention is not a random scanning process. It is strictly guided by fundamental environmental structures and feature-specific rules. Bottom-up attentional capture occurs automatically when visual features deviate significantly from their immediate surroundings. Features such as luminance, contrast, color, motion, orientation, and spatial frequency are processed incredibly rapidly in early visual cortical areas. These networks automatically assign abstract saliency values to spatial locations across the visual field before the conscious recognition of an object even occurs. So this is another part one-ism that maybe we should just write down. Crucially, the automatic processing of high saliency items demands immediate neurological resources, often exacting a computational cost on subsequent processing. Research utilizing rapid serial visual presentation reveals that when a highly salient distractor appears, it triggers an attentional gate opening. This automatic diversion of resources can impair the detection of adjacent, less salient targets, a phenomenon conceptually linked to the attentional blink or repetition blindness. This reveals a rigid automatic processing rule. Intrinsic cognitive architecture prioritizes immediate, highly salient environmental anomalies over continuous uniform scanning, even when top-down goals dictate otherwise. So this is actually a really important point that maybe we should put for the stuff we're looking at now. Okay, Gestalt principles and psychophysiological signatures. Beyond isolated low-level features, the human visual system leverages structural regularities to automatically group simple geometric elements into cohesive, meaningful wholes, a process formalized in Gestalt psychology. The perceptual grounding of elements based on proximity, similarity, closure, or continuity is not a deliberate cognitive deduction, but a hardwired automatic feature binding rule inherent to the visual architecture. Right? Event-related potential studies provide robust temporal evidence for the absolute automaticity of Gestalt processing. So perhaps we should do this as well. Where would this be? This would be like sensory. Should we talk about sensory built-in sensory what would be a good way to call this or to describe this? Feature binding rules. So I'll just put that there. That might be important. Signatures prove that the extraction of coherent meaning from geometric noise is a mandatory subroutine that occurs automatically and entails specific neurophysiological cascades at both early and late processing stages. For example, for visual stimuli. Then we could just put that in there. All right, metaphorical constraints on spatial attention. The automaticity of perceptual rules also extends to how abstract metaphorical concepts influence physical spatial attention. For example, spatial metaphors of time dictate semantic automatic attentional biases. In visual search arrays, the cognitive architecture demonstrates a significant automatic preference for future-related information presented on the right side of horizontal orientations, reflecting an implicit mapping of temporal progression onto spatial geometry. And this is certainly culture based. So like if you were in a culture where you read from right to left, you would think about the future as left, and you'd have a perhaps the preferential bias towards that. This mapping interacts dynamically with working memory states. While intact, fully ordered Gestalt structures attract attention automatically as so this type of stuff is too in the weeds to even be practical, I think. Honestly, some of this stuff is too in the weeds to be practical, I think. So, I don't know. Maybe we throw it to part 1. I'm not sure. Okay. Yo, Daniel N. Stanchion the Mansion. Very nice. That's a new one, I think. Darmerdom, what's good? We are so Zach and Cody. How we are well. Oh, hope we are well. Hope we are well. We are well. At least I think we are well. Hopefully we are all well. Just another day, another dollar. Another bit of progress. Okay, so this is now, we are finally arriving at where I actually wanted to go in terms of this section, or this next subsection, I think. So we'll see. Precognitive affective processing and somatic markers. A comprehensive structural analysis of cognitive automaticity cannot be limited to purely logical or visuospatial algorithms. It must inextricably integrate the dimension of affect. Emotion is not merely a post hoc physiological reaction to cognitive processing. Rather, affective appraisals function as highly efficient, rapid precognitive computational heuristics. Okay, so we have to talk about, maybe we do structure this in terms of, what do we have? Affect. We have like sensory. This is where we could talk about what I just had. That might be slightly nicer. And what else is say? Not be limited to purely logical? What was logical up here? It was this, the metaphorical constraints? I don't know. Just this is all the sensory. This is stuff that we had in the first one. Okay, so then I think we're good. We're good to go. Another day, another document. Very nice. Of course. Of course. Okay, these heuristics evaluate environmental inputs and severely restrict the available decision-making space long before conscious logic engages. Absolutely. We've got the somatic marker hypothesis. Hello, Damasio. This hypothesis provides a foundational neurobiological framework for understanding how these bioregulatory signals guide complex decision-making. According to the model, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, operating in tandem with the amygdala, acts as a critical neural repository. It stores dispositionally recorded linkages between specific factual scenarios, so complex environmental combinations. You could think of it as priors, top-down signals, and the bioregulatory somatic states that the organism previously experienced in those scenarios. So this is bottom-up. When an individual confronts a novel but structurally familiar complex scenario, these somatic markers are automatically triggered, operating through two distinct regulatory pathways. We've got overt action. Alarm and incentive signals. When operating above the threshold of consciousness, the somatic state surfaces as an overt alarm signal, so warning of danger via anxiety or physiological dread, or an incentive signal indicating reward via excitement or comfort. This rapidly alerts the individual to the goodness or the badness of a specific option-outcome pair, allowing for immediate conscious qualification. So this is just going back to our discussion of salience and prediction error in part 1, where this stuff affects what becomes conscious to us. It affects what we notice. I just got a cool new weed vaporizer. Nice. What does the document say about recreational drugs? Dun, 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 dun. Well, it depends. Unfortunately, in the case of weed, we're going to have to talk about weed in part 2 and 3, actually. Part 2, I think we're going to give weed a good rap, right? We can only talk about... actually, no, we should say... I don't know. Are we going to talk about weed in part 2? All right, so pursuing your goals. We have to talk about weed where, in terms of, I think it helps people with creativity. I think it maybe relaxes people, but it doesn't matter if it relaxes you in part 2. It matters if it relaxes you in part 3. We definitely want to talk about that. It does inhibit your, certainly your like reaction time and like other cognitive abilities that you might want in certain scenarios. The other thing that's really unfortunate about weed is that it negatively affects your sleeping. You know, despite the fact that it makes it easier for someone to fall asleep if they usually have a hard time, or especially if they usually have a hard time falling asleep, it hurts the quality of the sleep. So then that affects everything the next day, right? Like that sleep is the number one thing to look out for when you're trying to consider your you know, optimal cognitive abilities. So yeah, I'm not sure how far we're gonna go into like weed for part 2, and then part 3 we have to talk about sleep as well, because sleep actually affects, you know, your emotional well-being. But then there's also weed in terms of how it helps people. It's a form of I don't know, therapy or treatment for certain conditions that certainly people would want to use. And we can't make any prescriptive claims about weed, you know. We just have to tell people what it does or what it helps with or what it hurts with, and you decide. That's going to be the whole thing. But yeah, we could have a weed week or something like that. That would be fun, weed week. What are the sources and references for the overt action? What are the sources and references for... Are we talking about sources and references for this specific... This guy? Like this 20... Oh, this is Access 27. This should be older, right? This is 1996. Is this Damasio? Yeah, this is when he brought up the semantic marker hypothesis. Now, does this specifically say overt? Covert? Overt? I don't know. I don't want to read this thing. This thing looks ancient. But we know the mechanisms behind this overt action. When it talks about overt action, it's really referring to signals that become strong enough because of the salience network, such that it breaks into consciousness, right? It breaks into the global workspace. It ignites in its local network, and that leads to the information being globally available across the brain, and that corresponds with your conscious experience of it. And the idea behind that is that it affects, it synchronizes with a bunch of different parts of the brain, so it's affecting a more holistic, noticeable experience. No wonder it sounded weird. What sounded weird? Overt or the somatic marker hypothesis? Stan, can I ask you, what do you think? Do you think it's possible to experience consciousness without the sense of a subject and/or objects? So are we talking human consciousness now? So I don't know. Like I would say first, have we found any instances of this? I think maybe without a sense of a subject, I think we found. Like I think we have answers to at least sense of a subject. Now, sense of an object. All right, that's slightly ambiguous because I think there might be, like, maybe you can identify objects, but you can't figure out what the object is. Like, maybe that's a thing. Like we would have to look into whether that type of thing has come up. I feel like they found so many different cases of parts of the brain being damaged, and that affects people's ability to make sense of certain things in their experience, that we probably could find those. I can say what the non-dualists report. What do the non-dualists report? Yeah, when we think about subject and object, we're going to think about it differently than the dualists. The dualists are going to assume that objects are like in some other space than our conscious experience, which is not what I would like, but like in a blind, deaf, mute. Well, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with the blind, deaf, mute. So the parts of their brains that would usually be leveraged for visual experience, the visual aspects of experience, are going to be used up, right? They're going to be taken over, right? That the real estate in the brain is high demand. What's the way to say this? Everyone's competing over real estate in the brain. So if no one's using a certain part of the brain, someone else is going to take it up. And that might lead to significantly different types of experiences for whatever takes it up than we usually have, because, you know, the parts of our brain that contribute to that experience for us are competing with the visual areas of the brain or the hearing areas. So someone who's blind, deaf, and mute might be able to objectify things in ways that we can't even comprehend. And blind, deaf, mute, what do you still have? You still have touch. So touch, you know, perhaps the touch sense of their brain becomes ridiculously huge, like with people who can feel Braille, right? So imagine that the parts of your brain that deal with touch, the feelings of touch or smell, perhaps, like they have taken over this other space, so that you have a much more sophisticated sense of touch and feel, to the point where your objectification of sensing what things are, and your own self-identity, like your own, not like your conscious self-identity or like your, you know, your linguistic self-identity, but like your experience of self is going to be much more affected by this feeling of touch than ours is. So that's what I'm guessing. Yeah, they lose the feelings of their being subject, and some say they lose the perception of objects. Yeah, I believe it. I'd imagine that could be this case. You know, whether it's through damage or through learned inhibition, I'd imagine that you could get to those points. Tactile input and output. Yep. I'd imagine they map, scan objects and environment via tactile senses. Yep. I would imagine so. Like, it would be similar types of neural processes, just, you know, more sophisticated in the direction of touch. So, yeah, like they would map and scan objects via touch, and they'd probably have a good sense of what's going on based on vibrations and stuff. They would be like the actual toffs of the world. The dudes that have gamma all the time. The dudes that have gamma all the time. Is that how it works? You get those gammas, and then you shut out the object. Which I guess objects are. This is all top-down stuff. So yeah, maybe if you're going crazy mode in terms of bottom-up, you just shut down the top-down. I'm not sure. I was reading the scientist's book. They only let them meditate 60 seconds, and they still had an 800% spike in gamma. Wow. I don't doubt it. I bet they've built that. You know, they've made it so that you start out that way. So the same way as like a person that learns Braille, right? Once they go blind, it's not like they need to charge up in order to read Braille. They can read Braille like immediately. Now, I guess this is kind of not the same deal. I wonder, the same analogy would be, you got someone that was blind for 20 years and they could read Braille, and then they get their vision back. Now, chances are that day they're still excellent at reading Braille. Now, if they stop practicing reading Braille, then they might lose that sense of touch over time. But if they keep up that practice, then they can keep up that type of skill, but it would still be an immediate skill. In gamma and sleep too, that's really cool. They also tested the monk for psychic abilities and he failed. Oh, that's unfortunate. Yeah, I don't think any amount of training in your brain can create the psychic abilities. I know there's like all kinds of conspiracy theories with remote viewing and all those other similar topics, but I don't think that that's feasible. I don't train in this at all, right? Yeah, I guess the question is, if you were to try to train in it, could you get anywhere? And I don't think so. I don't think physics allows for it. Okay, and then we got covert action, biasing signals. Now this is the much more pervasive process going on. More frequently and subtly, the somatic state acts as a completely non-conscious biasing signal, operating through indirect neurotransmitter systems, most notably dopamine. These covert markers bias the very mode of reasoning. They automatically highlight certain components of a situation over others via covert attentional mechanisms and trigger the undeliberated inhibition of previously learned disadvantageous responses. All right, this is really important. So, when we talk about the somatic marker hypothesis, I know it, I've talked about it in terms of making decisions or in terms of rational thinking, and you might say, hey, well, I don't feel emotions when I'm making decisions, or I don't feel these things happening. And yeah, most of this is happening below conscious awareness. You can't, unless you really, meditate on this stuff, then it's going to be very difficult to notice a lot of these signals. And even if you were to meditate on this stuff, I think you would still not be able to notice all of the signals that are affecting your biased perception of the world or your decisions. So this is something to keep in mind. We are not privy to what's going on under the hood here when we're making decisions. This is what I mean when I say this, the experience of certainty. This is all happening like under the hood, and it creates this feeling that this is certain, right? That this is definitely a pen count. Yeah, I would theorize that's the stuff that you become more aware of, stuff that's normally just below consciousness. Right. Like if there was like a range, you would, and you're normally here. Once you train, you start getting the ability to notice these things. But I don't think if someone meditates forever, or if they're like one of those yogis, that they get it all, right? Like I still think that there's stuff that would inherently just be under this level of conscious experience. Certainly works like that for sense perception. Right. And yeah, it's just a lot to notice in one time too. Like that's another thing. Like perhaps you can build the ability to, we were talking how you can like notice things happening, like discrete changes in your conscious state. And yeah, I think that in reality, those changes are happening way faster than you could notice them. Like in the same way that a visual stimulus can't get to your conscious experience until like a few hundred milliseconds, something that enters your conscious awareness can't get to your conscious awareness for that much time, because it requires each network to take in that information and then to process it separately and then to ignite back to the global workspace. So you would still have that type of lag on these senses. It's noticeable too, like something just slips by and I reflect hard to see what it is, and it feels like, oh yeah, there was a flicker of anger, jealousy, or pride, or a thought of whatever that would have never been made conscious without very close observation. Absolutely. Yeah, that's I mean, I'm like so not practiced, right, at this point, and I'm even noticing that type of experience where you can just kind of you notice this little this little flash of something, and yeah, just being able to notice that is hugely rewarding, but also revealing. It just reveals how much is happening that we usually miss. Retrospective self-reflection. Or are you saying retrospective self-reflection on these types of experiences? Because yes, certainly there is, this is a retrospective reflecting on what we just experienced, and in that moment you have to kind of try to remember what that is. You have to think about it, so you're kind of trying to keep those loops going to feel it, so that it can affect the other parts of your brain that now need to identify what that feeling is. Okay, from a computational perspective, somatic markers are indispensable automatic processing rules. By instantly rejecting highly disadvantageous options and highlighting potentially positive ones, they radically constrain the decision-making space. This rapid pruning makes the remaining options manageable for slower, logic-based, cost-benefit analyses within working memory. Individuals suffering from ventromedial prefrontal cortex damage, lacking these automatic affective heuristics, face a mathematically unconstrained decision tree. Consequently, their decision-making becomes exceedingly slow, erratic, random, and frequently irrational, despite maintaining perfectly intact formal intellect, working memory, and language comprehension. Okay, all this is great. All right, cognitive appraisal dimensions. The generation of these affective states is itself governed by rapid automatic appraisal rules. Oh, okay. Is this all still coming from... Oh, no, this is coming from something else. Now, is this Damasio as well, or is this someone else? Someone else. All right, appraisals, emotion, and emotion regulation. An integrative approach. The present work aims to investigate the relation between appraisals, emotions, and emotion regulation strategies by creating a structural equation model which integrates these three aspects of the emotion process. Okay. It finds these results show that they experience primarily three types of emotions. These appraisal profiles and emotions were associated with the use of different strategies for regulating emotions. The effectiveness of these different strategies will be discussed. Okay, I don't know where that's going to go. All right, cognitive appraisal theories posit that specific emotional states do not arise randomly. They emerge from unique, highly structured combinations of automatic cognitive evaluations regarding an individual's circumstances. Okay, so we can talk about these types of rules, right? So this is similar to like the feature binding rules of sensory experience, but now we can talk about somatic marker rules. Cognitive architecture automatically maps environmental stimuli and situational context along several orthogonal dimensions. 6 primary dimensions have been consistently identified. Really cool. This is new stuff, as far as I can tell. And when I say that, I mean new to me. So, okay, we got pleasantness. So this is evaluated intrinsic valence. Evaluates intrinsic valence. Okay, so we got straight up positive versus negative. High pleasantness drives joy, hope. Low drives anger or fear. Then we got anticipated effort, calculates necessary metabolic and cognitive resources. Okay, so this is all the stuff that's being calculated. This is so cool. All right, we got pleasantness, anticipated effort. We got certainty. Oh my gosh, there's our feeling of certainty. Assesses predictability of the outcome. Low certainty triggers anxiety or hope. High certainty drives pride or anger. So one of the things that Heidegger got me in the mode of thinking about is that when you see an object, you can imagine that what's happening here is that you're always in this mode of intention of moving towards some expectation. So even though it feels like it's a feeling of the present that this is a pen, you're always kind of ahead of yourself in this sense. You're always, I could say hoping that it's a pen, but you're always like committing to the fact that it's a pen. This is like a prediction that you're having, and so this feeling of certainty happens when you arrive at this where the bottom up signal is telling you like what you're predicting here in every moment. Even as I'm staring at this thing, I'm still always in this mode of predicting that it's a pen, right? Like that, this is predictive processing, right? Where there's the top-down priors that's affecting how we experience the world, but then the bottom-up senses are constraining that. So as I'm still looking at this pen, I'm still getting that bottom-up signal, and we're just constantly in this always moving, active process, and so certainty is what's coming to me as I'm in that mode of, really just believing that what I expect to see is there. And that we can think about in relation to when we try to rationalize something, when we justify something, when we think about facts in the world, when we think about that the physical world is something that's like true in some sense, when we think about some religion being true in some sense. Like we're all just, that's what's happening bottom level. That's really it. It's just an experience that's afforded to us by these signals, and it creates creates an array of emotions. And okay, we got attentional activity. So I guess this is what something about the trajectory of our focus. Determines whether the organism approaches or withdraws attention. Wow. Interesting. Yeah, what is approach and withdrawal when we're talking about like norepinephrine and acetylcholine? I think that would have to be an acetylcholine issue, right? Acetylcholine is what actually directs the spotlight, whereas norepinephrine is kind of like how locked in we are to the spotlight. And yeah, if we're thinking about approach or withdrawal, maybe there's like slightly more norepinephrine for, I don't know, the ends of this, like immediate approach or immediate withdrawal, but I'm not sure. I would imagine this is a function of acetylcholine and dopamine. But all right, responsibility. What is going on there? Responsibility, control, self, other. We've got computes agency. Who caused the event? That's the computational function of this. Okay. And this can't be just people, right? This has to be like when we're thinking about any type of deterministic system, we have to now, make a who's at fault for this, Who's at fault for the apple falling from the tree? And we could say it's gravity. And in many cases, we end up like anthropomorphizing objects or forces or energy, right? We could easily anthropomorphize these types of concepts. Self-responsibility for success yields pride. Other responsibility for harm yields anger. Okay. Situational control. So I do actually want to put something like that. Does this apply for non human interpretations? For example, gravity causing the apple to fall to the ground. All right, then we got situational control here. And I do want to look into the like where this is actually coming from. Like, what are we getting here? When was this? Does the semantic marker hypothesize 2014 account for cognitive dimensions of appraisal? An appraisal, because I've seen this in different contexts, an act or instance of appraising something or someone. Okay. Evaluation of property by the estimate of an authorized person, right? Okay, so I guess that's just it's referring to all these different dimensions. All right, let's actually, I gotta write all this stuff down. Okay. And then okay, for instance, an environmental cue automatically appraised as high in pleasantness, low in certainty, and low in situational control will reliably trigger hope. Conversely, a cue appraised as negative, low in certainty, and low in control automatically generates anxiety. These dimensional evaluations occur precognitively, decoupling raw stimuli from rigid, fixed action patterns found in lower organisms, and providing humans with a flexible yet highly structured set of motivational action tendencies. By functioning as precognitive filters, these appraisal rules guarantee that the organism's limited conscious resources are instantly directed towards stimuli with the highest relevance to survival or psychological homeostasis, facilitating emotion regulation strategies ranging from problem focusing to suppression. Crazy stuff. And this is all just still in there. All right. The algorithm of heuristics and ecological rationality. While affective processing algorithms handle physiological and emotional salience, cognitive heuristics govern the automatic processing of logic. Probability, frequency, logic, probability, frequency, and categorization. Human cognitive architecture bypasses the computational impossibility of assessing all environmental variables via formal Bayesian or classical probability by deploying fast, frugal rules of thumb. All right, this is great. So now this is more of, where do we put affect here? Okay, it's at this level. So the traditional dual process framework, right? We discussed this already. This is pioneered by Kahneman and Tversky, which cleanly distinguished between two modes of thought, System 1 and System 2. System 1 thinking is characterized as fast, automatic, effortless, associative, and non-conscious. It relies heavily on specific heuristic algorithms. Now, where did we talk about? Okay, we could actually bring up System 1 and System 2 here. Because we did introduce it here, right, in our introduction. Yeah. And so, yeah, the question's going to be which of these heuristics can we bring up in this first pass versus if we were to have a second subsection, and do we actually want the second subsection? I think we do, given that we're talking now about a lot of other stuff. But let's see. So this, yeah, okay. System 1 is characterized as fast, automatic, effortless, associative, and non-conscious. It relies on specific heuristic algorithms. So this is like the availability heuristic, the representativeness heuristic. And I'll just put these down just so that I keep them, even though I already have notes on the availability heuristic and anchoring and whatnot. Anchoring and adjustment, relying too heavily on initial, often arbitrary rules and making insufficient cognitive adjustments when generating a final assessment or estimate. These rules operate flawlessly in ancestral environments, acting, I don't know about flawlessly, acting as survival mechanisms where frequency and physical availability correlated highly with objective probability. However, in statistically complex modern environments, the rigid, unchecked application of these automatic rules results in predictable, systematic cognitive biases, such as overconfidence and confirmation bias, profoundly impacting professional decision-making in fields like finance, law, medicine. All right. Of course. Ecological rationality and fast and frugal heuristics. More recent advancements in cognitive science, heavily championed by Gigerenzer. Gigerenzer. This is a crazy name. Completely reframe these heuristics. Oh, okay. Hell yeah. This is what we want. Rather than viewing them as flawed cognitive shortcuts that deviate from normative rationality, they are understood as tools of ecological rationality. All right, this is what we're looking for. And how new are we talking about here? Heuristic decision making. Crazy. Do we have a date anywhere? No. Oh, what is going on here? Contents? Is this from a book? All right. What's the newest date we can get from this? 2003, 2006, 2008. This is a terrible way, but I should just Google it. 2010. Oh, there's a lot going on here. All right, I'm gonna guess 2012 if that's all we're getting. All right, heuristic decision making. Okay. Not interested. 2011. Okay, we were off by 1. Are they still in the game here? Yes, they are. Okay, fake publications in science, mass production. Alternative models of funding, curiosity-driven research. Is Occam's razor losing its edge? Amazing. New perspectives on the principle of model parsimony. Wow. We got to check that out. That's great. Okay, a heuristic is deemed ecologically rational to the exact extent that its structure is adapted to the specific statistical structure of the environment. by exploiting natural environment structures, such as the recognition heuristic, where a recognized item is automatically judged to have higher value or probability than an unrecognized one. Human cognition routinely achieves a less is more effect. In this paradigm, simple automatic rules actually outperform complex multivariable statistical models in both speed and accuracy, proving that capacity limitations do not force us into judgmental errors, but rather guide us toward optimal frugal processing. Hell yeah. Even though we can see these biases, Octavius Laser, very nice. Even though we can see these biases, and we often talk about biases in some negative connotation, like we rely on these biases all the time, and it makes our life easier all the time. And in some ways, and sometimes it makes our life harder. So we got to keep an eye out. All right, the unimodal synthesis. Furthermore, the rigid structural dichotomy between intuitive System 1 and deliberate System 2 has been heavily revised by the proposition of the unimodal of judgment. Neuroimaging data, fMRI, has revealed a paradigm-shifting reality. Intuitive, so the automatic, and deliberate, conscious, judgment processes do not rely on architecturally distinct separate neural systems. Here we go. Right, these are the same neural systems, but we are dealing with, so the global workspace is, what's the word? Consists of, is oh, it's not just consists of, it's constituted by a bunch of different networks, in the sense that when we're talking about the global workspace, we're really just talking about a synchronization pattern where, I'm not sure how unimodal is pronounced, but I guess one model for, both System 1 and System 2 here. So yeah, we're dealing with the same systems that are doing all the System 1 processing, all the fast stuff, and the slow stuff is really just, it's really a description of information going from different parts of the brain back to each other. It's like a synchronization of disparate processing that is, essentially being put together through this global workspace. So even thinking is not like a specific thing that happens in one part of the brain. Like, it does rely on all these different aspects of experience that are afforded by our long-term memory that affect the trajectory of our thought, of our thinking, our procedural thinking. Instead, both modes of decision-making utilize common core brain networks and rely on the identical adaptive toolbox of rule-based mental mechanisms. Okay, so traditional dual process theory says two distinct separate cognitive systems. Right, we have to think about the more modern, modern notion of the uni-model of judgment. All right. Unimodal, no. Judgment, yes. And this would be a single. That both modes utilize the very same rules from an adaptive toolbox. What is this? Rule utilization? Oh, I see. Yeah. Both modes, so this is System 1 and System 2. And then we got this is the neural correlates. Common brain networks activated in both modes. Differential activation is only additive. I don't exactly know what that means, but primary distinction, the dimension of consciousness and automaticity. All right, we don't need to know that. Do I even need to write down this? Probably not. Actually, yeah. Under the Uni model, an algorithm like the recognition heuristic can be deployed either automatically or deliberately. The difference lies it depends what we mean by deliberately. The difference lies solely in the dimension of consciousness and the operating characteristics. Automatic processing occurs when the rule is executed beneath conscious awareness, producing a subjective gut feeling, whereas deliberate processing involves explicitly holding the parameters of the rule in working memory. This demonstrates that human cognitive architecture is highly unified. All right, so we can play with that, but I'm going to reword it so that we are very clear about what it means to be deliberately processing, which is just a description. It's just an interpretation of what's going on in our working memory. So what's going on in the central executive network, as we discussed yesterday. But once again, what's going on in the central executive network? I should write this down. Once again, what is going on in the central executive network slash, what was it? Working memory. Is not a direct reflection of what we are conscious of. It might correlate with it in some sense, but it's not like your consciousness is the deliberate pointer. Your consciousness is just a manifestation of where your deliberate pointer is currently at. Okay, thinking, more like snap decision making. Not because there isn't time or resources, but impulsive personality. I mean, we are all impulsive personalities then in that case. Impulsive trait that deems indecision and inaction as detrimental even when the situation doesn't always make it so. So yeah, I guess that there still is going to be some sort of individual difference of traits, whatever they are, that's going to affect how easily they can navigate this position, whether or not they experience more anxiety in these positions, how quickly they can arrive at a solution, or how impulsive they are. You know, there's a lot of individual effects, which we will talk about in the individuals section, the context of the personal context section, I think it's called. Okay, implicit social cognition and social hierarchy mapping. Okay, so I think we're chilling for now because we can get into the taxonomy of these concrete heuristics in the next section, but all that we've been discussing is all like high level what the brain's doing and how it affects the trajectory of our thought. So, okay, as an obligatory social species, social species, humans possess an extensive, highly specialized array of automatic processing rules dedicated specifically to navigating complex social hierarchies, forming group alliances and inferring the traits of conspecifics. The vast majority of this social cognition occurs entirely outside of conscious control, forming the neurocognitive basis of implicit bias, stereotype activation, and spontaneous trait inference. And tomorrow we are going to be talking about us versus them, right? No, that's tomorrow we have fun, and then Saturday we'll talk about us versus them. There's no fun to be had in a discussion about the us versus them. Okay. Lack of impactful consequence often reinforce these sort of traits. Okay. Yep. That's actually a good point where it's a reflection of the salience that is determined after you kind of make one of these decisions. Like I should say more so that we are perceived or we are interpreted as impulsive because of how our salience network is accepting or not accepting the outcome of the process of coming up with possibilities and then checking that through the salience network. Okay. The Occam's razor paper tickled me. Looked into it a bit. Just skimming seems like it misunderstands Occam's razor to me. Critiques it being used as a rule, which it of course shouldn't be, but that's trivial. And sort of seems to completely miss that it's meant to be used when explanatory power is equal in competing hypotheses. Don't think there's much in that paper, but maybe. Yeah, I imagine they're just using a popular notion here, and they're still talking about perception. They're not talking about explanation, right? Like those are two different pragmatic discussions to have. Or I guess the second one's more so pragmatic. The first one's more so, I guess it's pragmatic in a different way. It's like pragmatic in terms of what automatically happens when you perceive. Occam's razor, what is the actual, like, in philosophy, it's the problem-solving principle that recommends searching for explanations constructed with the smallest possible set of elements. So right off the bat, like, to leverage Occam's razor, it's something usually that's conscious, like you're applying it. Perhaps you could learn it, like you can habitualize this type of behavior, this type of thinking pattern, but it's something to be used in your own thought. And then also it's something that you can argue with. You could say that, you aren't following Occam's razor. I'm following Occam's razor because this, and this. So to think about Occam's razor as so this recommends that's definitely different than what's automatically happening in our own brain. It is also known as the principle of parsimony or the law of parsimony. It is frequently cited, blah, 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 which translate entities must not be multiplied beyond necessity. Although Occam never used these exact words popularly, the principle is sometimes paraphrased as of two competing theories. The simpler explanation of an entity is preferred. Okay, so yeah, could we get another meaning here? Similarly, in science, Occam's razor is used as an abductive heuristic in the development of theoretical models rather than as a rigorous arbiter between candidate models. So yeah, not once in there do we see it being used as a way to describe our unconscious processes. Biology, though. Okay, now this is going to get tricky, though. So biologists and philosophers of biology use Occam's razor in either of two contexts, both in evolutionary biology. Okay, so no, this isn't going to be that, right? Argues that the best way to explain altruism among animals is based on low-level individual selection as opposed to high-level group selection. All right, this is what I was just reading about. Altruism is defined by, okay, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, self is gene. But as Sapolsky was saying, we can think about it more so as the selfish genome, which takes into account the complexity of epigenetics and of environment, inhibition, or what's the word? I'm not going to remember that, but expression, environment expression. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we're going to find it here. Philosophy of mind justifies preference of the mind-body. Okay, no. Software development. Anti-razors. The first line of the second paragraph is bang on. Of the second paragraph, are we talking about the actual second paragraph in the full text? Oh, on the wiki. Uh-oh, the second paragraph in the entire wiki? Like this guy? The preference for simple explanations, known as the parsimony principle, has long guided the development of scientific theories, hypotheses, and models. Yet recent years have seen a number of successes in employing highly complex models for scientific inquiry, for example, for 3D protein folding, or climate forecasting. In this paper, we re-examine the parsimony principle in light of these scientific and technological advancements. We review recent developments, including the surprising benefits of modeling with more parameters than data. Wow. The increasing appreciation of context sensitivity of data, and misspecification of scientific models. And okay, so I was totally wrong with where I thought they were going to take this. And so far, they're being appropriate, I think, based on what we just read. Oh, preference for simple explanation is arguably a straw man. It's following this, right? The principle is sometimes paraphrased as, of two competing theories, the simpler explanation of an entity is to be preferred. That's what it's referring to. But it's not just using that, right? It used that description as a as just like a placeholder for the describing, but to talk about these types of things, right, where this, right, the benefits of modeling with more parameters than data is literally against Occam's razor, right? Like that's like straight on the actual definition that's brought up here. Constructed with the smallest set of elements. So now we're seeing something where we have many elements that is making sense of data. So I think they're using this actually quite appropriately. Such as predictive accuracy, interpretability, effectiveness in guiding new research, and resource efficiency. We conclude that more complex models are sometimes essential for scientific process, and discuss the ways in which parsimony and complexity can play complementary roles in scientific modeling practice. So, I mean, this paper seems to be pretty benign. Like, it doesn't seem to be that controversial in its like what it's trying to say. I think it's just going to say, hey, like we see that there are methods that are against the notion of Occam's razor in like a definitional way, and you know, it's not saying that Occam's razor isn't like a good heuristic. It's just saying that there's examples of cases where Occam's razor doesn't hold up in science, in modern science. So I think that's the takeaway I'm getting. If a complex model explains something better than a simple model, that's completely beside the point of Occam's razor. Right, yeah, like I guess Occam's razor is just kind of saying it's like a heuristic that's pointing in one direction. It's like a shorthand, I'm guessing. But if it's being used in terms of argumentation, though, then yeah, it would be against the Occam's razor argument. Because imagine if someone came to the table and just argued that, hey, like we should go with the other way, not the way that you've just pointed out is perhaps better, because it's got the simpler set of parameters or whatever. Talk to the mic. Am I talking away from the mic here? Does it get real quiet when I like get all the way over here? Like, is this real different than over here? I'm wondering if I should change my mic orientation. Faint? Oh, it does become quite faint. I was worried that if I would talk too close to the mic, it would get really loud. So that's why I've kind of kept it slightly farther away. Maybe the microphone really should be on the side of where I'm looking constantly. Hopefully it doesn't seem like the volume's changing a ton. But you know what? I've been editing these YouTube videos and I haven't noticed anything. But chances are when I get far away like this, it's probably becoming much more faint. So I will try to stay closer. Okay. Implicit bias. So I'm not a fan of calling it implicit bias, because implicit is like a very loaded word. I like the idea of unconscious bias. Implicit sounds like you are getting this bias because of the way you are. It is It is implied by your own being that you have this bias, as opposed to implicit being like under the hood, you know. Implicit can mean both of those things. So, social categorization is one of the fastest algorithms executed by the social brain, by the human brain. Stereotypes and social attitudes are stored as strong mental associations in long-term memory that trigger automatically upon exposure to relevant social stimuli. Faces, voices, cultural markers, or group labels. Unfortunately, races. And that's something that Sapolsky talked about. And it's not fun stuff. All right, this automatic activation functions on a predictive brain model based strictly on Bayesian principles, where prior cultural and personal experiences are continuously utilized to rapidly predict and interpret incoming social stimuli, ensuring rapid navigation of the social environment. So, you know what? This is a question I have. When should we talk about cognitive processing through the lens of predictive processing versus Bayesian? No, I'm spelling that wrong. Bayesian principles. Doesn't the former make more precise sense than the latter? I don't know, but unconscious or subconscious, those are the same thing in terms of neuroscience, I think. So we have this like intuitive notion of subconscious, and that's really just to describe things that we aren't conscious of, really. And unconscious is just anything outside of our of conscious. You know what? What would subconscious be? Because there's always this idea that perhaps there's this space of our conscious experience where we aren't aware of it. We're not self-consciously aware of it, but it's still coloring our conscious experience in some way. And that wouldn't be unconscious, but maybe that's subconscious. But for the sake of this type of very low-level discussion, we want to be talking about unconscious. It's really important that these things are unconscious, because people don't want to think about these things as being able to be unconscious, because they think that their experience is their entire being in some sense, and that, you know, then everything that arrives in this experience is true in some way. You know, when I see the pen and I think it's true, that's some like reflection of the world or myself in some fundamental way. And the fact that there's so much stuff that's happening unconsciously that's actually affecting what becomes conscious is really weird for a lot of people. So we have to really harp on that. If consciousness is an overlay, subconscious is unconscious would definitely be underlay if consciousness is an overlay. Subconscious would be like the edges of the overlay that you barely notice. I don't know though. Unconscious is shut down PC. Unconscious is like, unconscious in like neuroscience is processes that are not in the realm of consciousness. But so that's different than when we say like the person is unconscious. When we say the person is unconscious, we're saying that there is no overlay. The overlay's off. That's what we would mean is, the person's unconscious. So it's like not great, that's not a great way of it's not great that there's this word that means two different things like right there next to each other. So, but yeah, what is subconscious? Subconscious versus unconscious refers to information just below the level of conscious awareness, memories and habits easily retrieved. The unconscious represents deeper, inaccessible layers containing repressed. So this is just like intuitive, but this isn't actually following. I should say in neuroscience. In neuroscience and psychology, the unconscious refers to automatic, inaccessible brain processes that influence behavior, while the subconscious refers to mental processes just below the threshold of awareness that can be accessed with focus. Huh. the unconscious is generally viewed as inaccessible, whereas the subconscious is considered pre-conscious. So this is like a very weird way to talk about this. Because in theory, what would be... So, yeah, it's like a different angle that you're coming at the equation. If we're talking about unconscious as things that you could not possibly be conscious of, then we're talking about the physical world now. We're talking about physical processes that no matter what you think about, you're not going to think about the processes directly. And subconscious would be theoretical. They're theoretical in the space of consciousness, that if you were to think of this thing, you would be able to notice this conceptual interpretation of what's happening, or what is happening under the hood. So, and then obviously this is not the way that Freud usually uses it, so we have to be careful of that as well. I think for the most part, we're going to use it. We're going to use unconscious, because that really is more fundamental here. That being said, in part one, we do introduce these concepts in intuitions about our experience. We talk about consciousness, then we talk about subconsciousness. How do we say it? We're going to do a roast of this stuff soon, actually. We can understand consciousness as operating across different levels of awareness, shaping how we perceive and interact with the world. At any moment, our conscious mind encompasses the thoughts, perceptions, and sensations that are immediately accessible to us, while the subconscious mind, though outside our direct awareness, continuously influences our behavior and emotional responses. These levels of consciousness interact dynamically, shaping the full spectrum of our experience. Automatic unconscious awareness allows us to perform habitual tasks, such as walking or driving a familiar route, without deliberate attention. Here, the brain operates on autopilot, efficiently relying on subconscious processes to guide actions. Conversely, so yeah, we perhaps could change this up to be more clear about subconscious or conscious or unconscious, and then also more clear about, hey, like, we're going to just use unconscious from here on out. It doesn't really matter which one we use for this, but we're going to mean something very similar. And then we talk about self-consciousness as like these are very like basic intuitive notions that we're introducing here. We're not getting in. This isn't like the way that neuroscientists use these terms yet. But this is just how we open up. If you haven't heard me do a read through of part one, stick around for when we do the roast. We're gonna be doing document roast next week today. We're gonna start roasting the prologue of part one, collective knowledge of the world. Hopefully just making it a little better over and over again. Having the words unconscious plus awareness together feels like an oxymoron, right? Absolutely. Unconscious awareness is literally just like the lapse of awareness. It's like not even it's not an effective way to describe that. Okay, so what am I saying? The premise that predictive processing makes more precise sense than Bayesian principles contains a category error. All right, they are not competing theories of the same phenomena, but rather descriptions of cognitive processing operating at different levels of abstraction. In contemporary cognitive science, Bayesian principles provide the mathematically precise ideal, while predictive processing provides a biologically plausible mechanism to approximate that ideal. All right, so we wouldn't say that we are Bayesian thinkers, even though Bayes sort of resembles what we actually do. Is that the way to go? I should have put that into the... Let's get this going here. So would it be apt to say that it would be inappropriate to think that we are absolute Bayesian thinkers, but Bayesian principles is somewhat consistent with how we actually think? In reality, of course, we are following predictive processing, and we can consider whether or not our predictive processing matches Bayesian thinking in certain ways and when it fails. All right, let's see what it says to that. Exact Bayesian inference is computationally intractable for the high dimensional continuous stream of data the brain processes. The brain does not and mathematically cannot compute exact posterior probabilities for every sensory input in real time. Okay, you have the right intuition for the first half of your premise, but the second half requires a slight epistemological correction regarding contemporary consensus. So the correct intuition is that it is inaccurate to view humans as absolute or exact Bayesian thinkers. In contemporary cognitive science, and I don't know if this is Bayesian, but I'm going to just keep saying Bayesian because it's funner. It's more fun. Yeesh. Humans are understood as approximate Bayesians. Because exact Bayesian inference is computationally intractable for complex real-world data, the brain cannot calculate exact posterior probabilities. Instead, it relies on approximation schemes that usually yield results close enough to the Bayesian ideal to facilitate survival and functioning. And okay, where your premise slightly oversteps is the assertion. In reality, of course, we are following. Okay, this is gonna be rough. While predictive processing is arguably the most unifying and dominant theoretical framework in neuroscience and psychology today, it remains a model, right? A hypothesis about how the brain implements approximate Bayesian inference. It is not yet a proven universal biological fact. There is ongoing debate about how perfectly predictive coding schemes map onto actual neural microcircuits across the brain. There are also competing and complementary frameworks that explain cognition without strictly relying on continuous hierarchical prediction error minimization. All right, so I should just... In reality, of course... no, okay, maybe it's the of course. In reality, we are... I should say... Our cognitive behavior... more closely follows the predictive processing model. Maybe I should say likely more closely. Likely. All right, this will be fine, I think. It'll like this one. I think that we've gotten enough to just go ahead with predictive processing as pretty clear, but it is just a model, and that being said, it's like a highly evidenced model. Not just at the, we've talked about this before, but not just at the level of like full neural processing, but within like neuronal processing in certain types of neurons. All right, that's an accurate way. We are not absolute Bayesians. Predictive processing is the likely biological reality. The most biologically plausible theory for how the cortex actually works, rather than computing exact probabilities. Okay, so here's a question: does predictive processing not show up in non-cortical regions of the brain? Does it not describe perhaps higher level orchestration between subcortical networks? Or is it just the fact that the cortex is just so deeply connected to all these other networks that we have to just point to the cortex? Okay, and then what are we at? We're at 149. We just need to keep going on this guy, right? The processing of these implicit associations is structurally delineated by the quad model of implicit task performance. Performance on implicit measures, such as the implicit association test, is dictated by the interaction of 4 distinct parameters. All right, activation of associations. So the automatic uncontrolled triggering of memory links regarding a social group. The baseline automatic rule executes regardless of conscious intent. We got overcoming bias, the ability. Okay, this is coming from like implicit bias tests. We don't really care. We're just trying to point out the heuristic, that the heuristic's there and how it manifests. So the activation's important, but overcoming bias, we don't really care. The deliberate cognitive effort directed toward producing a culturally appropriate response. Nah, we don't care about this. Research confirms that automatic evaluations regarding group affiliation, in-group versus out-group, exert a significantly stronger influence on rapid behavioral responses than explicitly reported egalitarian beliefs. Group affiliation inherently biases evaluation algorithms, automatically fostering in-group favoritism as a mechanism of positive distinctiveness, social identity, and survival cohesion, demonstrating how automatic rules can systematically trump rational behavioral economic principles. Okay. Okay. That paragraph has assimilated the meters. Assimilated the meters. That's an interesting phrase. Okay, you're right to catch the limitation of my previous response. Confining predictive processing strictly to the cerebral cortex is an outdated oversimplification. In contemporary cognitive science, the consensus has shifted significantly. Predictive processing is now understood not just as a cortical algorithm, but as a universal operating principle across the entire neuroaxis, including deep subcortical structures, the brainstem, and even the spinal cord. Furthermore, your intuition about higher level orchestration is precisely where the cutting edge of the field is focused today. Subcortical networks are not just participating in predictive processing, they are often dictating how the rest of the brain processes those predictions. Okay. So the cerebellum, it was the... Okay, so this is actually important for our adding into the previous section. We needed the cerebellum. Long before predictive coding became a grand unified theory of cognition, neuroscientists understood the cerebellum as a forward model. When you decide to move your arm, the motor cortex sends a command, but it also sends a copy of that command to the cerebellum, which calculates a prediction of the sensory feedback you should receive from that movement. Okay, this is great. This is actually what we need. This is what we need in this story above. So I'm going to just put this down here. All right, interoception and the brainstem, right, is not just about what we see. It's also about predicting the internal state. But things like the insula is still a cortex, right? The insular cortex. So that wouldn't be there. But obviously these lower level parts are involved in this process. The question is, like, would we say that predictive processing is happening there, though? Models, right, demonstrate that the brainstem and subcortical regions constantly send ascending sensory prediction errors about visceral states to the insular cortex. Top-down predictions about what the body should need in the next moment drive allostasis. Okay, our subjective experience of emotion is currently theorized to the brain's attempt to conceptually categorize these subcortical interoceptive prediction errors. Okay, so the basal ganglia, the midbrain, and precision. This is where your point about orchestration hits the mark. If your brain is flooded with millions of prediction errors every second, how does it know which ones to ignore and which ones to update? We need salience here. The brain must estimate the reliability or variance of the error signal in predictive processing. This is called precision weighting. Current consensus points to subcortical neuromodulator systems as the orchestrators. Dopamine from the midbrain, basal ganglia, from the ventral tegmental area. Traditionally viewed simply as a reward signal, dopamine is now modeled in active inference frameworks as encoding the precision of policies. It tells the cortex, this prediction error is highly reliable. Pay attention to it and act on it. And then we've got acetylcholine and norepinephrine. These Subcortically generated neuromodulators act as the volume knobs for cortical synapses, dictating whether the brain relies heavily on its deep priors, top down, or updates rapidly based on new sensory data, bottom up. Okay, we can get rid of this now. I took the cerebellum stuff and now we're running. Okay. Oh, here we go. Social hierarchy. This is what we need. This is what so far Sapolsky hasn't talked about it a ton, but it's super important. So there's in-group, there's out-group, but even in your in-group, you've got social hierarchy that's going to affect the way you think. And we will probably end after 7.2 here. The human visual and cognitive system is explicitly calibrated to extract social rank and personality traits from facial cues in a matter of milliseconds. Spontaneous inferences regarding dominance, trustworthiness, and competence are generated well before a face is consciously recognized, operating as fundamental character trait algorithms. Insane. Evolutionarily, this reflects an automatic processing rule oriented entirely around social hierarchy formation and risk assessment. Physical cues of attractiveness and dominance reliably serve as automatic proxies for social status, shaping newly developing social hierarchies even in modern contexts. When the brain identifies an individual with cues indicative of high status maxing, it executes involuntary attentional adjustments. For example, gaze cueing effects are significantly amplified when observing high-ranking individuals. Humans display an automatic, involuntary tendency to follow the eye gaze of dominant figures. So, you know what? Sapolsky did kind of talk about some of this. While some evolutionary psychologists view this reliance on superficial physical cues as a modern evolutionary mismatch, others interpret it as a highly efficient convention of social learning that facilitates coordinated group action, deference, and the rapid allocation of value within a group. These status allocation schemas are biologically primary, operating as taken for granted socio-cultural norms that organize behavior seamlessly at both the micro-interactional and macro-societal levels. Really important to know that, because your mind is going to always be affected by it. All right, wonder how accurate is hand-eye coordination in terms of the brain. Some required reactions are simply too fast for the brain to process, but the body still reacts and catches it. Yes, this is a huge deal, actually. This is just because you mentioned it. Let's check it out. Can you recall for me the study about the outfielder, I think, regarding predictive processing and embodied cognition? I think this is a thing. Sensory input and reactive action bypass something. Yeah, so the it's just the brain. So predictions are being affected by sensory input from 1 second prior, right? And when I say 1 second prior, I mean like literally 400 milliseconds prior. And that's affecting the predictions that are happening, and that's going to affect your ability to catch a ball in the outfield, right? So required reactions are based off of predictions, which is why it's very, the game where you have like the hand, someone's got their hand there and you have to like slap the underside of their hand before they can do it. And it seems like it should be really hard to get your hand all the way around just to slap. They only have to go out this way, but because you have such a jump on them that you're able to get your action in before they can do it. So I know that's not the same exact thing as you asked, but it's like a similar idea. All right, the reference you're looking for centers on the outfielder problem, a foundational case study used to contrast traditional computational views of the mind with embodied cognition and predictive processing. The most prominent paper establishing this paradigm, titled How Baseball Outfielders Determine Where to Run to Catch Fly Balls, The traditional cognitive science computationalism posited that the brain acts as a ballistic computer. Under this model, to catch a fly ball, the brain observes the initial variables, so velocity, angle, wind resistance, calculates the ball's complex parabolic trajectory, determines the exact landing coordinates, and then commands the motor system to navigate to that spot. The consensus now rejects this for the consensus now rejects this for this specific task. Humans lack the innate neurological architecture to perform differential physics equations on the fly, yet people routinely and accurately catch falling objects. So the embodied solution, heuristics over computation. So McBeath et al. And related ecological psychologists demonstrated that fielders do not calculate an end destination. Instead, they utilize continuous feedback loops that couple perception directly to action. There are two primary models governing this. We got optical acceleration cancellation. When a ball is hit directly at the fielder, they move forward or backward to ensure the ball's vertical angle in their visual field increases at a constant rate. If the angle accelerates, the ball will fly over their head. If it decelerates, it will drop in front of them. So this is a very simple heuristic, like a very direct heuristic that we're not conscious of, by the way, but it's still like a heuristic that our brain is following that allows us to, and it's probably a learned heuristic, right? This is something that we've probably learned from, I don't know, working with fly balls. Like it's probably something you learn when you learn to catch fly balls. And we probably have similar heuristics when someone just throws a ball to you, you know, maybe like a football or something. We have heuristics about, you know, when the ball is this high or something above our head, like what does that mean for what we should be doing? They're like very minute heuristics that we really can't notice, but they're like built in. It's not like a lot, like no part of our brain is like following these heuristics as if it was like a, you know, as if it was code, as if it was like if this then. These are all just continuous analog systems that are effectively processing just based on these heuristics. These are all like built in now. All right, linear optical trajectory. When the ball is hit to the side, the fielder adjusts their running path so that the ball appears to trace a straight diagonal line against the visual background. By continuously adjusting their movement to keep this simple visual variable constant, the fielder is mathematically guaranteed to intercept the ball. So the connection to embodied cognition. The study is heavily cited in embodied cognition literature because it demonstrates that cognition is not exclusively brain-bound. The cognitive burden of calculating advanced physics is offloaded onto the environment and the body's physical movement. The solution to the problem is not a static representation in the brain, but a dynamic, inactive process that only exists while the fielder is moving. And the idea being that this is some sort of active movement, process. And obviously active inference is our more effective way of going about this. Within the predictive processing framework, specifically the concept of active inference, popularized by Carl Friston, the brain functions to minimize prediction error, the gap between expected sensory input and actual sensory input. So expectations here could also be following the heuristics we just talked about. So the outfielder problem is the perfect mechanical illustration of this. The brain generates a rigid top-down prediction of what its sensory state should be. For example, the ball's optical trajectory will remain linear. When wind or gravity alters the ball's actual path, a discrepancy occurs. In classical models, the brain would update its internal model to reflect the new reality. Under active inference, the brain instead moves the body to alter the sensory input, forcing the world to match its prediction. So that's really important. We can move to, we can do things, we can act to get reality to match our prediction rather than to learn what reality has to say. The fielder continuously adjusts their running speed to zero out the prediction error, maintaining the expected visual trajectory until interception occurs. Would you like to explore how this heuristic model of active inference scales to more abstract cognitive tasks, or would you prefer to examine its other applications in motor control and robotics? I think we'll chill. I was thinking of ice hockey. It's ridiculously fast-paced activity, and goalie reaction time is mind-blowing compared to the speeds the puck travels at and snapshot of the sticks and fakes the player inserts before shooting. Right, yeah, imagine that so much of what's going on in that moment when they're catching the puck is learned. It's learned from past experiences, but what's being learned isn't just like it's not like a video. It's not like you're learning the trajectory of the puck when you see it, right? It's not like you're just learning that. You're learning the whole system. You're learning all these heuristics of color or lighting, or where your head needs to be, and where your hand should be when the puck gets there, where it should just be in general. Baseball is played at a snail's pace in comparison, except for a catcher, right? Wouldn't you say that or actually no, a fielder might be catching a ball that's faster than the catcher, right? Wouldn't that be the case? How fast does a puck go? All right, let's do this one. How fast does a puck go in hockey compared to a baseball in baseball?
Hockey pucks can get seriously fast. In professional play, they often travel around 90 to 100 miles per hour.
That's not that fast.
In fact, some
slap
shots have even gone above 110 miles
crazy,
per
though
hour.
I'm guessing that a baseball
in baseball, the fastest pitches also hover in that range, with elite pitchers hitting 100 miles per hour or more. So, in both sports, those little objects are absolutely flying.
I'm guessing that in baseball, we can see the baseball be even faster after it's hit. So if we're thinking about which sport deals with the fastest moving objects, would it be like a fielder, or maybe even the pitcher, right? The batter just hit the ball back to the pitcher, and the pitcher now needs to catch this ball. By the time the ball reaches the pitcher, what velocity would it be going at?
Yes, when a baseball is hit, especially a line drive, it can exceed the speed of the pitch by quite a bit. In fact, some of the hardest hit balls off the bat, known as exit velocity, can reach 110 to even 120 miles an hour. A line drive back at the pitcher might be traveling well over 100 miles per hour. So in that split second, a pitcher can face something moving faster than a hockey puck, making those reaction times incredibly tight.
All right, let's up the ante. Let's go to that other sport that people do that's really dangerous. Is it like, I don't know, is it called like Howlway or something like that?
I think you might be referring to Jai Alai. That sport is notorious for its speed. The ball, or pelota, can reach speeds over 180 miles per hour. That makes it one of the fastest moving objects in any sport.
Crazy.
So if we're talking sheer top speed of something flying at you, Jai Alai definitely wins the danger contest.
Is there a sport that has a faster moving object that someone needs to catch?
In terms of catching, nothing really surpasses Jai Alai in speed. While objects in sports like golf or tennis might move quickly after being struck, no one is catching them. In Jai Alai, the players actually catch and throw that pelota at those extreme speeds. So if you want a sport where someone is literally catching the fastest object in sports, Jai Alai holds that crown.
Okay, what if we open it up to not just catching, but perhaps hitting or dodging, but it needs to be the speed at which it gets to a person?
If we broaden it to hitting or dodging, then bullets in shooting sports are obviously far faster, but that's a whole different category.
Okay.
In terms of pure sports, though, Jai Alai still stands out because that ball reaches the player in a fraction of a second.
Bullets?
Even in cricket, where fast bowlers might deliver at 90 plus miles per hour, or in tennis, where serves can exceed 140 miles per hour, reaction times are slightly longer. So, in sports where a person has to respond, whether catching, hitting, or dodging, Jai Alai's pelota still claims that top speed.
Okay. Baseball pitch has noticeable and reactionable pre-throw action. Ice hockey often do not have these hints. Right. Yeah, I'm thinking for a pitcher though. For a pitch, so pitchers are like particular. This is like probably the worst position I would want to be in. perhaps even less than a hockey goalie, because a hockey goalie at least is like padded up. Like the pitcher is ending its pitch and then has to react to something that may or may not happen, right? With a hockey, with hockey, you know that they're going to try to shoot in many cases, right? In a lot of cases, you don't, right? But even Jyla needs to wind up before the pre-throw. Yeah. It's fast, but not unpredictable. Okay. Yeah, I guess maybe I just don't know enough about hockey to know how quickly they can get from 0 to shot without the goalie even knowing it, right? Because the goalie can always expect a shot in certain positions, but maybe I just don't know enough. I mean, I imagine that the goalie often is like primed for a shot. So I don't know. This is going to get really arbitrary, and it's going to be ambiguous as to what the rules are here. But yeah, it's still a fun little aside here. Okay. But yeah, predictive processing is going to describe what's going on in each of these situations. Goalies needs to eye everyone on the ice too. It's not just 1v1. Right. Yep. True. I'm guessing you're big into hockey. Is that like the sport of choice? No real ice hockey in SG. Oh, what is SG? I'm guessing that's where you live. Are you saying that there's none to watch or there's none to play? What would SG be? Country. Singapore? Singapore. Okay, that was actually right. Nice. Yeah, I guess I was meaning more so like a fandom, watching the sport. All right, I think I'm gonna call it there. I think that was a good session. We got a lot in. We still have a few more sections here, but hopefully we'll finish that up and maybe move on to this guy. Maybe that tomorrow it's going to be, I'll just kind of work on this, but if anyone has anything that they want to do, we can always just switch to it. But at least this gives me something I can fall back to. And then, what did I do with this heuristic decision making? I stole from it. I took something from it, but I don't recall what it was. Heuristics, right. And then what was this? Yeah, human cognitive architecture. Oh, we want to get rid of this. We're not doing that. All right. I'm going to call it there. If you really deep dive into it, the body is an amazing tool. Absolutely. Yeah, unfortunately, I think you missed the embodied cognition days, but I was going through embodied cognition articles for a while in November, maybe. But yeah, the body's kind of crazy. Body can do a lot of stuff, and we obviously take things for granted that we learn, and yeah, the doc. We'll get to it in the document. The document talks about how skills become embodied, and we use our hands like tools. And once we pick up a tool, we can we essentially like absorb it into our body, or our schema of what we can do. It affects what we possibly can do now, and so we're always oriented towards possibility of what we can do. Yeah. So yeah. I think that's a good place to stop. Thanks for hopping in. Thanks for chilling. Thanks for talking. Thanks everyone else that was chilling today. And see you